cycle of birth and death, an essential subject from Vinipedia. Every living entity in this material world is struggling for existence throughout the cycles of repeated birth and death. The only salvation or relief from the cycle of birth and death is full surrender to God. When we do not take to the process of surrender, we are forced to engage in fruitive activities. Thus we become more entangled in the cycle of birth and death. Except for work in Kaya consciousness, all activities bind us to the cycle of birth and death. We should therefore never desire to be the cause of work. Everything should be done in Kaya consciousness, for the satisfaction of Kaya. Srila Prabhupada's books, lectures, conversations and letters offer a comprehensive presentation of this essential subject as seen in the Viniko's cycle of birth and death category. An introduction from his books is given below in the following 10 quotes. Quotes from Srila Prabhupada's books. A great scientist may make discoveries in atomic energy for the quick destruction of the world and may be awarded the best prize in recognition of his service or disservice, but he also has to undergo the reactions of his work by rotating in the cycle of repeated births and deaths under the superhuman law of material nature. All these people who are against the principle of devotional service are destined to rotate in this material world without fail. Armad Bh Gavatam 3.9 10. Everyone should know that a living entity is eternally a servant and that unless one serves K, one has to serve illusion in different varieties of the three modes of material nature and thus wander perpetually within the cycle of birth and death. Even the so-called liberated MYVD speculator has to undergo this process. This knowledge constitutes a great science, and each and every living being has to hear it for his own interest. Bhagavad Gita, Preface. A pure devotee does not pray for liberation or for cessation of the cycle of birth and death because he does not consider that important. The most important thing for a devotee is getting a chance to hear about the pastimes and glories of the Lord. The devotees who engage in the service of the Lord in this world will have the same opportunity in the spiritual world also. Armad Bh Gavatam 4.30 33. All qualities that are considered good according to the material estimation actually have no value because these so-called good qualities will not save a person from the cycle of birth and death. The conclusion is that one should be without mental desire. Any bilit nyajana karmdayan vitam. CC Madhya 19.167. One should be fully free from material desires, philosophical speculation and fruitive activity. Armad Bh Gavatam 4.29 66. As long as one is not completely free from the cause of birth and death, one cannot enter the Santana Dhyatma or the eternal pastimes of the Lord. One becomes envious because of being influenced by the designations of the body, but the liberated devotee has nothing to do with the body, and therefore he is completely on the transcendental platform. A devotee is never envious of anyone, even his enemy. Armad Bh Gavatam 9.11 23. In the human form of life the intelligence is developed, and one has to utilize that developed intelligence to get out of the cycle of birth and death. One who does not do so is a miser, just like a person who has immense wealth but does not utilize it, keeping it simply to see. A person who does not actually utilize his human intelligence to get out of the clutches of the cycle of birth and death, is accepted as miserly. Armad Bh Gavatam 3.31 17. A person who acts whimsically falls down due to false prestige. Thus he becomes involved in the laws of nature, which are composed of the three qualities, goodness, passion and ignorance. In this way a living entity becomes devoid of his real intelligence and becomes perpetually lost in the cycle of birth and death. Thus he goes up and down from a microbe in stool to a high position in the Brahmaloka planet. Armad Bh Gavatam 4.26 8. Not knowing the real science of life, a foolish person engages in the temporary activities of this life and thus becomes further entangled in the cycle of birth and death. He always desires material opulence, which can be attained by karma, jnana and yoga. But when one is actually elevated to the devotional platform, he gives up all these desires. This is called Anibilatnaya. Then one becomes a pure devotee. Kaitanya Karatam Ta, Madhya LL 24.104. The dirty things in the heart of a conditioned soul are the root cause of all troubles for him. A conditioned soul is surrounded by the manifold miseries of material existence, but on account of his gross ignorance he is unable to remove the troubles due to dirty things in the heart, accumulated during the long prison life in the material world. He is actually meant to serve the will of the Supreme Lord, but on account of the dirty things in the heart, he likes to serve his concocted desires. These desires, instead of giving him any peace of mind, create new problems and thus bind him to the cycle of repeated birth and death. Ahmad Bh Gavatam 2.1. 22. The cycle of birth and death cannot be stopped unless one is a pure devotee of the Supreme Lord. It is said, Harivan Naam Tim Taranti. One cannot surpass the cycle of birth and death unless one is favored by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Ahmad Bh Gavatam 3.25. 41.